Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us, Miguel Delaney, the Independent's chief football writer, and the Athletics football correspondent, David Ornstein. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run you through those back pages. Starting in The Guardian, which splashes on events at Lord's. Stokes' superhuman effort. Captain goes to dark places as he inspires epic England win. There's also a line on Rory McIlroy, who warns his rivals he's back in the groove for his home open at Portrush. Into The Eye, which calls it a victory for the ages, but England's joy is tempered by the bad news that Shoaib Bashir is ruled out of the rest of the series with a broken finger. David's story, a big one in terms of transfer news, that Newcastle are working on a deal worth around £75 million for Eintracht Frankfurt's Hugo Ekitike. And we will discuss the fallout from the Club World Cup final between Chelsea and PSG. But there is just one story dominating the back pages. England's dramatic win in the third test against India by 22 runs to go. 2-1 up in this 5-match series, sealed in slightly bizarre fashion with that final wicket of Mohammad Siraj, the ball bouncing and dribbling into the stumps off the injured Shoaib Bashir. David, it was a match that had everything. It had a little bit of needle, it had jeopardy, it has two very evenly matched teams, and whatever your preference in terms of the sport that you love, you couldn't help but be glued and transfixed by this.
That's right, Rob. It's breathed life into Test cricket once again, which is delightful for many of us who are fans of it. It was a bit of a slow burner, this Test match, but it sort of bubbled up perfectly. And I think all of the three tests so far have gone down to the final session before being decided on the fifth day, which is fantastic and bodes really well for the final two tests at Old Trafford and the Oval. It's got a bit of everything in terms of the tension between the two sets of players, some outstanding bowling from the likes of Bumrah, batting across the board has been of a high level. Stokes just absolutely magnificent today. Yet again, leading by example as England captain. And then Jofra Archer with his return from a couple of years of injury problems to the elbow and the back, and such a sensational start to today's play with a couple of fantastic wickets. And it's put England in a really strong position. I think India might feel a bit unfortunate, but, you know, it's bubbling up fantastically well. And you know, the crowd were enthralled by it, and many of us watching from afar too. And with an Ashes to come later this year as well, it's really exciting times.
It doesn't help in terms of the Ashes that Australia have just bowled out West Indies for 27. But it was interesting, actually, Miguel, hearing a very prominent cricket journalist speaking during the second Test match at Edgbaston, that often in the summer, in days gone by, it had a free run at the back pages, and this would be commonplace, seeing it all over the papers. But because of things like the Club World Cup, it faces an increasing fight for relevance. And as David touched on, matches like this, series like this, will only help.
And the transfer window and the Euros, which I'm at now. And yeah, I mean, look, I'm not, I'm from a country that's not a traditional cricket heartland in Ireland. I'm not the biggest fan. I'm in Zurich for the Women's Euros, which isn't exactly a cricket heartland either. And yet, like, you couldn't fail to notice, even the way friends talking about it, on like WhatsApp and the like, just the way it sees people. And earlier on, I was actually walking through Zurich city centre, and I went by one of the kind of Big Ben pub franchises, maybe tells you a lot, and people were watching outside on their iPads. And as as a journalistic colleague said to me earlier, it's a nice little line about it. It's one of those classic days where people pretend to be working. And yet, exactly as you've touched on there, I suppose it's one of those elements where you don't even need to be particularly, au fait with the sport or every single technical detail, because what really elevates it are these kind of elemental details. I think most of all for me, I suppose, because it's what I can relate to most, maybe the needle between the two sides, all the talk of gamesmanship, the time wasting, the way kind of wickets were celebrated with that bit extra relish, and maybe also this element of how sometimes the best sport comes from that maybe that level just underneath technical perfection, not quite at the top, because I mean, India dominated but lost the moments. England won the moments, but had they not, there would have been massive inquests. There's always obviously then the individual stories, which again is really what makes sport, that kind of narrative drive. Jofra's return, Stokes backing himself, The Bashir story, especially now with his injury. And yeah, really, it all adds up to kind of theatre with everything, really, and more to come.
Two of those players that Miguel's just mentioned, David, it seemed history has a weird way of repeating itself. That 6 years ago today, England were winning a World Cup final at Lord's, inspired by Ben Stokes and Jofra Archer. Now the same two players to the fore. Again, it's one of those impossible sort of pub questions that is very difficult to try and even get close to answering as to where Ben Stokes would fit in great British athletes, because he has such a prominence to step up to the plate when his country needs him most.
Yeah, he's a bit of a Roy of the Rovers character, isn't he? And when you think about the iconic figures from over the years, whether it be in cricket itself, in football, rugby union, motor racing, snooker, and so on, he's elevating himself to that status. And that World Cup final 6 years ago at the same venue, which actually took place during the compelling Wimbledon tennis final, which was another sport going on in recent days that Miguel didn't mention there. It really has been a fight for attention on the screens and the back pages. And it's actually come at a good time. Many schools have broken up, or this afternoon, many kids would have been coming home from school and watching it and watching Stokes' heroics. And likewise, on message groups, I heard Stokes being mentioned left, right and centre, and that really will make him increasingly prominent. I think he missed a lot of time through injuries himself, and so maybe he needs to perform on an even more consistent basis, and that's taking nothing away from him. And also do it, in Ashes series, which is what many English cricket and sports fans sort of define their cricket memories from in this country. But there's no doubt that he's certainly in the upper echelons of the British sporting heroes, and he has a capacity to deliver when it really matters. He picked up this morning with a really long stint with the ball and carried on right through to the end of play. Just didn't want to let go of it, and he really led the team in his own image. There's been all this talk of Bazball with the coach, but also with him, and England were the embodiment of Stokes, and he put his best foot forward, and he talked afterwards about going to sort of dark places and rarely having been to such dark places, and it paid off in spectacular fashion. He was worthy player of the match, and more of that will really sort of lodge him in the sort of annals of great over time. But he's got a lot more left in the tank, and in that sense it's an exciting time for English cricket if they can keep this going.
Let's stay with you, David, and move on to the transfer news and Newcastle's pursuit of Hugo Ekitike, which has been a long time brewing. Do you get the sense they're getting closer?
Well, they're working on it, and that's all we kind of know for now. There's no agreement. A deal is not close to being done, and there's no guarantee it will happen. But this is something that Newcastle are actively exploring, and it's a player that they've looked at for a long time, been huge admirers of. 2022, they almost got it done, and now they're trying to go that one step further. But it's going to be a significant expense if it happens. They're sort of trying to get something done at around £75 million. But the word from Eintracht Frankfurt is that it will take more than that. Not aware of personal terms agreements being in place yet either, contrary to some reports. So that's another hurdle that would need to be overcome. But they're giving it a good shot. Newcastle have got their Champions League qualification. They've got a trophy in the bag, and clearly their ownership is very ambitious. They would like, in an ideal world, to partner Hugo Ekitike with Alexander Isak, or have them both as part of their squad. Maybe Isak leading the line next season and Ekitike coming through as one for the immediate term, but also more so the medium and longer term. But you never know what happens in this. And Newcastle's intentions are absolutely clear. They've got no desire to part with Alexander Isak. But naturally, people are going to speak about it, because when you're signing a striker at great expense, or trying to, I should say, and he's got the profile that he has, then naturally, and somebody like Isak has the admirers that he has. People talk about Liverpool immediately because they really like him. There's been Arsenal in the past and others too. It's natural discourse. But yeah, Newcastle are trying to take a step forward in the market. But in this case, there's nothing done yet. It's a situation they're pursuing.
On that point then, Mig, it's about Isak and Ekitike potentially playing together, and that would be what Newcastle would like to do moving forward. That would sort of imply that the PSR worries that they had, particularly last summer, are sort of drifting away and they can be a little bit more free with their spending now.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have a better indication of the importance of qualifying for the Champions League and how crucial that last day was. I'd also think it's an acknowledgement from Howe and the Newcastle leadership of how, at a few times last season, Isaac was injured a few times, and there was always basically this kind of natural anxiety around the team when he wasn't there because they became so dependent on him. I mean, how couldn't you become dependent on him given his quality? And I suppose this is acknowledgement that he needs someone alongside him and also someone to carry the burden if he's not there. It would be a coup because he's a forward that a lot of clubs have looked at. I mean, it feels like not for the first time in the last decade, striker has been the position of the summer in terms of there's a premium on the prices because they're quite rare. There's a bigger discussion about whether the games has developed enough of them. I think it started it, but there's still not that many pure number 9s and not many in this sort of style. And why Ekitike has been so popular. I watched him for Eintracht Frankfurt this season when he played Spurs. Got a brilliant goal at White Hart Lane, or the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, sorry. It maybe didn't quite carry it through in the second leg, which shows that there is a player there to be developed. But that was exactly the same case with Isaac when Newcastle signed him a few years ago. Other clubs balked at him at the time because he wasn't the finished article, and now he very much is. I suppose this is the hope if they get Ekitike done. The one thing you would say here, actually, I suppose, is, and David alluded to it a little bit, one of the issues with Newcastle late in the market has been this slowness that has obviously frustrated fans and maybe frustrated a few people within the club as well, that they've been very kind of, there's been talk of a lot of kind of decisions going through various levels of the club. They've not acted on transfers when they could have. And it's why I suppose maybe they'll be all the more keen to get this over the line.
Just on frustration at things being slow, David, Arsenal's search for a striker would certainly fall into that category. But I think both of you have written in recent times about the fact that it is getting closer with Victor Gyökeres, and that would be the biggest piece of this summer puzzle done.
Yeah, it would be. They've got to get it completed, though, and they're working to complete it, and there's an agreement in principle which is for a fee of 63.5 million euros plus 10 million euros in add-ons, but they still need to sort of put the finishing touches to the nature of those add-ons. And there are reports coming from Portugal tonight that the sporting president, Frederico Varandas, wants sort of near fixed, guaranteed 10 million add-ons, and maybe Arsenal's thoughts on how you get to those add-ons are a little bit different. And I guess these are natural parts of the closing stages of negotiations, and it can get a little bit tense and complicated, especially because, this one's been complicated throughout with Gyökeres believing that he had an agreement with the sporting president Varandas to leave for 60 million euros plus 10 million euros in add-ons, and that the sporting president reneged on that, and Varandas saying there's no such agreement, and Arsenal have ultimately managed to get this agreement in principle for not too much more than that, and the agents involved have waived their fee and so on. So Arsenal are in a very, very advanced position on this, and they're trying to close it out. It's not done just yet, but they'll be hopeful that they can do so and get him on their pre-season tour. And that would be a massive piece of business for them. Of course, this long-awaited search for a number 9 and his goal-scoring record, especially in the last 2 years, absolutely spectacular. And his desire to join Arsenal and take up what's been prepared, a 5-year contract, and the force with which he's pushed it, and not return to training with Sporting Lisbon to almost help facilitate this move to Arsenal. So let's see if they can get it absolutely concluded. But that would be a massive piece in the jigsaw, alongside the likes of Mascara, who they're getting in from Valencia as a depth at centre-back. Obviously, Noni Madueke deal is getting through towards completion. They've done Christian Norgard and Kepa, and let's see what else they can do and try and renew contracts, the likes of Ethan Nwaneri, Bukayo Saka, William Saliba, etc. So it's a really busy time for Andrea Berta, the new sporting director, Mikel Arteta, of course, as manager, and the ownership, the Kroenkes, as they try and make Arsenal competitive again and get them over the line in attempting to win trophies.
All right, that is Arsenal. What about heading across London in just a couple of minutes' time to the new world champions, Chelsea? What does that victory mean for them? And what does the Club World Cup mean for world football? You're watching Back Pages tonight. The Independent's Miguel Delaney and the Athletic's David Ornstein are with us this evening, and we will start this part with one of Miguel's pieces, which refers to the recently completed Club World Cup won by Chelsea, but it will be the enduring image, I guess, of the whole tournament, Miguel. The sight of Reece James lifting the silverware with the President of the United States for very close company. Gianni Infantino, that the FIFA President, has proclaimed that the golden era of global club football has started. Do you agree with him?
Usually that's the sort of thing said with the benefit of hindsight of history, where you can actually assess things, or at least at the peak of a golden era, not at the start when you're basically trying to manifest a reality in actually what is quite a Trumpian manner, which in some ways, as jarring as it was, almost makes Trump's presence of this fitting in a little way. I mean, I was about to say it was an unprecedented spectacle. It's not, because, of course, at FIFA's last major event, the 2022 World Cup, we had the sight of the Emir of Qatar bestowing Messi with a bish. Now, bish, an otherwise innocent a garment that bestows honor. In this case, it was politicized because who was giving it to him. So in a photo that goes down in history, there's Messi with his shirt covered and a representation of Qatar. This was a next level on from that, where actually the political figure is right in the middle of it. And it's remarkable. As I say, it does feel like it kind of reflects an increasing, Trumpification of FIFA. People are talking about how it's FIFA going full MAGA. Because let's not forget, and while I think the concept of the Club World Cup is actually good, and it was Zvonimir Boban, a great Croatian legend, who initially came up with the idea. There was an argument to have some form of to spread the wealth of the game beyond Western Europe. Obviously, this implementation of it has raised a lot of questions, right up to the way that there's a legal action against FIFA from FIFPro and various leagues because they feel it was just, imposed in the game and on the calendar with no consultation. But yeah, after all that, and even after an issue on Saturday, FIFA sent out a breathless press release about how they'd consulted with player unions about kind of, future remedies, but they hadn't actually included FIFPro, who represents 65,000 players across the world. So yeah, it is almost this kind of Trumpian manner of just imposing it and thinking about the consequences later. And FIFA's big defense of this tournament has been, say, how it's going to spread the wealth of the game, find away from Western Europe. And that's a good idea, but the facts indicate that might necessarily be the case because Chelsea, as we've all seen, one of the main topics in this entire tournament hasn't been the glory or the triumph, it's been money. So Chelsea get at least, or the projections are $150 million for winning it. Whereas Boca Juniors, the big Argentine club who are supposed to be in this, as a way to help kind of reinforce these clubs, well, they're projected to get $17 million. That's a huge gap. And I'm not sure that really addresses some of the issues that FIFA claim are going to address, leaving aside all the other issues of this, which how it kind of, increases Saudi Arabia's power in sport, the way kind of Trump looks to have politically used it. And yeah, there are all sorts of complicated questions around it.
And just to sort of pick up on that, Miguel, and the phrase Trumpian, part of it almost seems that one of the problems is that discussing it, critiquing it, feels a little bit futile because if FIFA want it and the money's there, it's going to carry on whether FIFPro or anyone else likes it or not.
I think that's a big thing. And I think that's why people are talking about that it's a little bit almost underappreciated. This is a really significant moment in football history because, it used to be, up until recently, it used to be the case that the clubs hated FIFA. They thought they were an embarrassing nuisance. Whereas now, Infantino has got the clubs on side. He's proven to them he can deliver a big event. Now, this big event might be dependent on Saudi money. It mightn't yet be able to stand on its own 2 feet, but it's there now. And a lot of the big clubs who weren't in it, well, they're now starting to think, well, if Chelsea are earning this much, we could do it getting involved. And there's UEFA, obviously wanting to protect the status of the Champions League. They're under the impression they have this agreement that the competition will only be held every 4 years. But the clubs are already discussing this, potentially going every 2 years, maybe expanding to 48 teams. And as Infantino has basically, he's seen, it doesn't look like there's much to stop this, despite a lot of criticism within football.
Just on the football itself, David, which is very quickly being forgotten in this whole tournament. Levi Colwill, speaking afterwards, said, I said at the start of the tournament, our plan is to win it. People looked to me as if I was crazy. I'm going to say the exact same thing going into the Premier League and Champions League. I think we're ready. Do you think they're ready?
Well, they're building a competitive team for sure. And the recruitment has shown they're adding depth and quality. And despite, the perceived chaos of the first couple of years post Abramovich, it actually appears to be coming together, and credit to the hierarchy and Enzo Maresca for doing that and overseeing it. And, they've already won a European trophy. They've now won a world trophy. They've qualified for the Champions League. And when you look at the players they've got at their disposal, the strengths, particularly in attack, then they are capable of challenging the best teams from what we've seen. And they could get even stronger. There's plenty of time left in the market. And they've got a lot of young players. It was the youngest squad, wasn't it, in the competition, who are going to mature. They've got more players coming in this summer, next summer from overseas, a good academy as well. So, yeah, it's highly plausible. They need to do some work, I think, a little bit still more towards the other end of the pitch in defence and maybe the goalkeeper, although Sanchez had a great tournament. But things are actually looking up for Chelsea, and a lot of people laughed at them, but perhaps Chelsea are going to be having the last laugh on the pitch, the way things are looking.
Just to sort of weave back the finances, though, Miguel, and the game's governing bodies. UEFA fined them recently and said part of it, the stipulation was, look, you've got to sell some players. Is that likely to be enforced, do you think? Or do we, because of this revenue that they've brought in from the Club World Cup, this huge recruitment drive we've seen over the last couple of seasons just going to continue?
Yeah, well, as a few people pointed out, it was a more lenient punishment than Crystal Palace got. And this is actually where kind of this. I'm not saying these issues are connected, but at least there's a question to be raised here with how can UEFA say, or FIFA, govern the game properly when they're both basically competition organisers as well as regulators who now need to keep the big clubs on side. I mean, it's a question for football now. As regards what Chelsea do next, yeah, I mean, obviously this prize money helps. I think as regards that UEFA punishment, we've seen with these sort of things that financial penalties and settlements, especially for clubs that actively want to spend money, they don't mean that much, and it's why sporting sanctions tend to be most significant. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The devil will be in the detail as regards to this kind of player registration issue. And I suppose a lot of other clubs, certainly, especially those that weren't in the Club World Cup and are, talking about how much money Chelsea have made, they'll be watching this keenly.
Fortunately, time has beaten us, but there is a piece from Mikel, as he's mentioned a couple of times. He is out at the Women's Euros at the moment, and it is a big game ahead for England this week as they continue the defence of their title. A big win over Wales. It is a very impressive looking Sweden next for England in the last 8 out in Switzerland. David, Miguel, thank you very much indeed. If you missed any of the show, there is the chance to catch up. Back pages tonight at 1:30. And the show is also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again on Tuesday night. Our guests will be John Cross and Charlie Wyatt.